If you're new here, my name is Seth. I'm one of the pastors here at The Well, and I just want to start off this morning by just acknowledging how excited I am about Rooted. So we had this plan where we're like, okay, we want to get 47 people signed up for Rooted. That was like, technically the number was 47.5, so maybe it was like we actually wanted 48 people to sign up for Rooted. And we were a week out from registration closing. And I'm like, guys, we have 20 people signed up. Like, we are not going to hit this goal. And you guys blew it out of the water. We have 77 people signed up to go through Rooted. Yeah. So we're just excited to see as God takes these 77 people through these next 10 weeks together. We're excited to see what's going to happen and how lives are going to change, because we know that when people seek God, that God shows up. So now, if you have been with us for maybe any point this year, then there's a pretty good chance that you know we've been going through a series in the book of Mark. So we've been going through for a while now. Mark is only 16 chapters, but we have finally, today, we're making it to chapter 11. So we're getting there. We're getting there. And this whole series has been pointed at how Jesus is the unexpected king. The unexpected king. And I think that one of the most notable things is that seems to be here is that we have this desire. They, the original apostles, they had this desire for Jesus to come as fully God. But we don't always care as much about the human side, right? We don't reflect as much on what it meant for Jesus to be fully human. But as we've been reading through this, we have seen over and over again just how human Jesus is. And we've been going through this, and there have been so many times that we've gone through the gospel narrative, and we've seen that it says that Jesus had compassion. He felt compassion for people. Or like when we looked at the rich young ruler, it says that Jesus looked at him and loved him. And so we see these human moments. And then what happens is when real life happens to us, right? We have this like lofty picture of Jesus in the Bible, but then real life happens to us. And we think like, yeah, I'm going to look and it's going to be like Seth looked and he loved him. And Seth looked and I was like, how dare you? Right? Right? That's how we are in real life. And when we get caught up in these tense moments and we get angry in these moments, we often look and we feel like we have failed in some sort of way. And here's the reality. Sometimes we did. Sometimes we failed. But what if I told you that sometimes these moments are not failures? Right? Jesus didn't get angry often, but that doesn't mean that he never got angry. So then the question is, what is it that makes Jesus angry? So once again, if you've got your Bibles, we're going to be in Mark chapter 11, and we're going to see exactly what it is that makes Jesus angry. And so Mark chapter 11, starting in verse 12, it says, "The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry, and seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. And when he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, 'May no one ever eat fruit from you again.' And his disciples heard it." What a moment, right? Now see, at first glance, Jesus is hangry, right? Like, we get it. We've been there. We've been hangry. We can empathize with that. We've been there where it's like, man, Seth, you just need a Snickers, man. Like, you are not yourself right now. And I've been there with my kids where I'm like, guys, we were out eating somewhere the other night, and my kids had lost their minds. And then the food finally came out to the table, and it was silence. I was like, yes, see, you are hangry. You're good now. So we get that. We get when we have done things, and we look back and we regret those things, and we realize, man, if I would have just had a little bit more food, right? I would have been fine. Here's the reality. Every Sunday after second service, y'all are all right, but second service, every Sunday after second service concludes, there are two things that I want. One is a fat nap. You guys know what I mean. Like Sunday naps, there is something different. There is something holy about Sunday afternoon naps, right? Like they just hit different. I think all of us know that. They're on another level. The second thing I want is I want a spicy deluxe meal from Chick-fil-A. And you know, If you know anything about Chick-fil-A, you know you can't get that because Chick-fil-A is closed on Sundays. And so every time I have these cravings, I remind myself of this moment because it's kind of like Jesus has pulled up into the Chick-fil-A drive-thru and he's like, oh, I hit the jackpot. There's nobody here. I'm first in line. Oh, it's Sunday. That's why there's nobody here, right? And then he curses Chick-fil-A and says, you will never produce chicken again. And here we are, right? But the reality is that this is bigger than just being hangry, right? I think we know that intrinsically, whether we're familiar with the story or not. We're like, there's got to be something more here than Jesus is just kind of out of sorts because he needs some food. This fig tree actually opens our story, and then we're going to leave it for a moment, and then the fig tree is going to come back into the story because Mark, the gospel author, he is trying to communicate something to us. There's a bigger deal than just being hangry or Jesus disliking figs. See, the core of the problem is that from a distance, the tree shows all signs that it is going to be a tree that is producing fruit. Until you get closer and you realize that there is absolutely no fruit. The tree deceived you. And I think that's one of the reasons that when we talk about Christianity and how we're doing in Christianity, we talk about whether or not we're bearing fruit, right? We talk as Christians, nobody else talks like, Christians talk weird, guys. I don't know if you've acknowledged that ever, but we talk about like, what fruit are you bearing in your life and stuff like that. This is how Christians talk. But we recognize that we cannot just have the appearance of being Christians, but we actually need to be producing the things that should be naturally flowing out of somebody who claims Jesus as their king, right? Okay. Whew. I felt like a softball, guys. I don't know. Maybe I need to tone this one down a little bit. See, Dallas Willard was a philosopher and a theologian. He called this kind of Christianity, he called it barcode Christianity, right? Basically, he was talking about these people who they believe in Jesus, but they only see the rest of Christianity as a means of sin management, right? And so not actually something to transform your life. And not actually digging deeper in what it means to be a disciple or a follower of Jesus. This is like when you go to the grocery store and you're there for I'm just getting bread, right? But if that bread has a barcode that reads peas, guess what you're paying for? Like the machine doesn't know. The machine's not like, wait a second, right? The machine's just straight up like, that's the barcode for peas. You're paying for peas. Management's going to order more peas, whether you walked out with a loaf of bread or not. It has nothing to do with what the item itself is. Do you get what I'm saying? It's just the appearance of the barcode. This is external Christianity, where there is absolutely no internal weight to it. Back when I was in high school, I had like really, really long hair. Like we're talking like halfway down my back. Super curly, like not quite Titus, but also not that far off, right? And so add my mom on Facebook. You'll find it somewhere. So while I'm in high school, I had this really, really long hair, and people would ask me, they're like, dude, how do you get your hair to look so nice? I'm like, nothing. I don't even comb it. I just wake up looking this good. Still do. And I specifically remember this one time that I had one of my friends, best friend, over at my house. He would come over often. We would hang out all the time. And I mean, we're high school boys. You know what high school boys do? They prank each other. They get into trouble. They do all the things that they're not supposed to do. And so there's one moment, one prank that will always stand out in my mind. Because there was this moment that he had been almost like stalking me like prey down the hallway in my parents' house. And it's like this moment, where you're going to scare somebody and you're walking up behind them and you're like kind of creeping. Your hands start to hover over the shoulders. You take that silent breath in so you can finally jump out and scare them, right? And I remember this because that moment finally happened where he screams and he grasps my shoulders. And the crazy thing is that I did not turn around nor scream. In fact, my mom did, because it wasn't me. Because from behind those luscious long locks that I had and my girlish figure had fooled him into thinking that this was Seth when it was, in fact, my mom. And so it always stands out because I'm like, dude, you just like pranked my mom. What's wrong with you? But see, sometimes our Christianity is like that, right? Where it's like, if you view me from just the right angle, you're going to believe that I'm a Christian. But you better hope that you don't have to turn around, right? Because if you turn around and you see what you really are, and that you're just hoping for that barcode to get you into heaven when the time comes, and you're not actually investing your life in Jesus, man, we just better hope that we never have to turn around. What we're ultimately talking about is the importance of your life actually producing the things that the Spirit creates in believers that he is working with. We call this the fruit of the Spirit, right? This is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And so the question is this. Here's the question. When people come to you because they're in need of that fruit, of the fruit of the Spirit, what do they actually get? What do they actually get from you? When they come to you needing love, joy, peace, patience, etc., is that what they find, or do they find that you are not actually invested in Jesus that maybe you let on? Are they able to actually empathize with Jesus in those moments because when they come to you and they're hungry for the fruit of the Spirit, they find, just like Jesus did, that there are leaves, but there's no fruit at all. There's nothing coming from this. Are they able to use you as the excuse why they don't show up on Sunday mornings anymore? Or when they come to you, do they find that you have absolutely been filled to the brim with the things of God? That you've been waiting for this moment to love and invest in others? Do they find that when life squeezes you and puts the pressure on, that you are just overflowing with faith? And you have put everything you have, all the chips in to following God. Right? It's often one or the other. Because here's the thing. It's actually the fruit that you bear outside these four walls that's going to make the biggest impact regarding what happens inside these four walls. Right? You can come to church and you can look like a Christian in here, but how much does that matter? How much does that matter? Right? It's actually what you do out in the rest of the world that's going to impact what actually happens and what actually matters in here on Sundays. So then we keep going. We keep going in the story. Mark 11:15. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And he taught them and he said, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you've made it a den of robbers." And the chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. Man, Jesus is on a roll today, right? He comes up to this fig tree and he's like, "You're going to die." Walks up to the temple and he's like, "I'm flipping these tables over." This is just, Jesus has unlocked something. There's a ton going on here. Jesus finally gets to Jerusalem and he goes into the temple and he starts flipping these tables. And John gives us an incredible insight into this moment, because John actually tells us that as Jesus entered the temple, he fashioned a whip. Like, this is not the Jesus that we think of anywhere else in the story. Jesus is getting ready to go in the temple that he has been in plenty of times, mind you. He's done this before. He's seen this thing. This is nothing new. And this time, imagine what's going through the apostles' heads when they're like, "Jesus, what you making over there? What's going on here? You just told this fig tree to die, and now it looks like you're not done," right? There's a lot going on here. And I think that this was this moment where something unlocked in Jesus that his closest followers had actually never seen before. Now, here's the crazy thing. Mark, this guy who has the shortest gospel, this guy who writes fewer details than any other gospel author, wrote more about this moment than any of the other gospels. All of them address it in some regard, but Mark wrote the most, and yet he didn't actually tell us why Jesus did it. Right? Like, what in the world, Mark? He's like, man, you guys would not believe it. Jesus went in there, he's flipping tables and everything. And then we go to the next story, and it's like, what? What are you doing, Mark? Right? He puts in there that Jesus, he comes in, he flips tables, and he teaches that you guys have made this house a den of robbers. But what does that even mean? Right? But we're given a really important hint. There's one group of people that's singled out. We're specifically told about Jesus going after those who sold doves. So here's what's going on here. Look at Leviticus chapter 5, verse 7. Anyone who cannot afford a lamb is to bring two what? Two doves or two pigeons to Yahweh as a penalty for their sin, one for a sin offering, one for a burnt offering. So the reality is that the current state of the temple is set up in a way so that the money changers in there, they had found a way to put more money in their pockets. But they're doing this by going after the people who are already the most marginalized. Like, imagine there's two ways that this happens. Either you show up to the temple and you're like, hey, I'm poor, I can't afford a lamb at home, I need to buy a dove, right? And you go in there, you buy a dove. And here's the crazy thing. It's the money changers, which means that everything that's happening is also getting taxed to the Romans. So you're also paying into the pockets of those who are oppressing you outside the temple. Or here's the other option. You go to the market outside the temple and you buy the dove with that little bit of money that you have. And you go into the temple and they tell you, this one's kind of blemished. I have one I can sell you though. For what, 10 times the price? Right? This is what Jesus sees when he's going in. These are the people who are being impacted when Jesus is going in. The people who are seeking a moment to be able to have access to God once again, to atone for sin so that they can have access to God. Those are the people being oppressed. You know, I've heard people say when they're talking about this passage, like, this is why we can't sell coffee in church and why fireworks fundraisers send everybody to hell. Not looking at anybody, right? But that, honestly, that is a gross misreading of this text. Jesus wasn't mad that money was being exchanged in the temple. Jesus was mad that the people who he came to save were being oppressed. And not just oppressed, but they were being oppressed by the people in his house. It's like if the church was known for being the most oppressive organization in the world. That's what we're talking about here. Jesus was mad for this reason. You know who needed to sacrifice a dove because of poverty? Luke 2:22. When the time came for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord, as it is written in the law of the Lord. Every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord and to offer sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of doves or two young pigeons. So who's poor? Oh, Jesus' mom is poor. Jesus is poor. Jesus' family is poor. And suddenly this is very, very real, right? Like, this isn't an abstract idea of oppression. This is, you see this every single time you go to the temple. You see your mom struggling with funds, struggling to get back right with God. And then you see the temple oppressing her as she gets there. This is mom, right? This is like when you're at the movies, right? And I like, you're out watching Spider-Man or something, and they go after Aunt May. And you're like, no, you don't go after Aunt May, right? Like, Aunt May is off limits. I can tell you so many people to go after. Aunt May is off limits. Why? This sucks us into the movies. They know what they're doing when they make the movies this way. This is how they get you emotionally invested. Why? Why? Because we know Aunt May. We know her story. All the other people that the Green Goblin kills that we don't care about, we're like, we don't know your story. Who cares? Like, it's a movie. We're like, it's fake, it's fine. And then Aunt May, and we're like, how dare you, right? Suddenly it's not fake anymore. The answer is proximity. We care about the Aunt Mays. But it's not just that we care about them and not the others. We care about them because proximity. We know their story. It's harder to care about people you don't know. We care about Mary getting oppressed because we know her story. Jesus, do you know who Jesus hung out with? He hung out with the worst of the worst, the poorest of the poor, the most marginalized in society. And so guess who he knew? It wasn't just his mom that he knew that was getting oppressed by the temple. It was probably the vast majority of people who were poor that Jesus personally knew. He had personally invested in and knew their story. Jesus allowed himself to become one of them. So here's the big idea. Jesus comes to ensure that everyone has access to God, not just the powerful, rich, and religious elite. Jesus comes to make sure everyone has access to God. See, when we see that the temple is taking advantage of Jesus' mom, we immediately get emotionally invested again, right? But Jesus is actually, he is helping us to reorient this in a way that drives the emotion even deeper. This way, what Jesus is doing is he wants us to see humanity in a deeper way, in a more connected way. Jesus wasn't just flipping tables for his mom. Jesus was flipping tables for everyone who was being oppressed by the temple. What makes Jesus angry isn't just people taking advantage of his immediate family. It's anything in opposition to human flourishing. Jesus has created you and me for specific purposes. He wants a certain life for us. And it's the things that get in the way of that make him angry. This is how we are as parents too, right? Like if something gets in the way of your kid's dreams, you're ready to go. You're ready to fight, right? Like you're taking the earrings out and you're like, let's go, whatever it takes. Jesus cares about us that way. But most importantly, what makes Jesus angry is anything getting in between humanity and God. Right? That's what the temple was ultimately doing. Oh, you want to make this sacrifice to get your sins forgiven? You're going to have to cough up more money. You're going to have to pay us more. Otherwise, you don't have access to God, and who knows what's going to happen to you then. Right? This is what they were doing. That's actually the thing that connects all of this together. Jesus was angry because the money changers were taking advantage of those who were already the most marginalized. But I think we often miss the thing that Jesus said right before he called out these men for turning his father's house into a den of thieves. Jesus said that the thing that the temple was supposed to be was a house of prayer for the nations. Not just a house of prayer, but a house of prayer for the nations. See, to any good Jew, you're immediately, Genesis 12:3 is on the mind. You're immediately thinking of Genesis 12:3, where God tells Abram, I'll bless those who bless you, I'll curse those who curse you, and all nations will be blessed through you. All nations. God's heart was always for all nations. And here's the crazy thing. Not only were they not praying for all nations, not only were the money changers set up in the temple court, which was used to oppress the most marginalized, but the place, the location, the temple court was the only place that Gentiles, non-Jews who had converted to Judaism, this is the only place they were allowed to pray and worship. And the Jews came in and said, nope, off limits. This place, prayer for all nations. And they said, nah, only the Jews can be here. See, the temple itself was the opposite of a racist institution. But the Jews found a way still to be racist. And to say that only if you're like us, only if you're born in the same place of us, do the same things as us. And you know what? Even if you converted, sorry, you're the wrong race. You can't worship here. This place of prayer for all nations. That's what it was turned into. So when we say that Jesus has come to ensure that everyone has access to God, we're saying that he came to bring access to the ones that you kind of hope don't have access. He's after all nations. He was never just for the Jews. He's never just been for America. He's never just been for the well. Jesus' vision is so much bigger, so much more robust than we can even handle. The whole point of Jesus calling the singular man Abram was so that all nations could be brought in to share God's blessing. The whole point of the temple was so that it could be this house of prayer for the fulfillment of that calling, so that all nations could share in God's blessing. That's the thing that his people are called to. See, I was here when Remedy Youth had their glow night, and they had blacked out this entire place. I mean, I almost didn't want to see some of the ways that they blacked out this place. Like literally, they had stuff that they threw up over the roof to make sure no light could get in there. Like everything they could do to make this, like if they could get zero light, that's what they were after, right? Totally blacked this place out. And then they played this game called Sardines, right? Now, if you haven't played Sardines, what you do is, as the lights are out, one person goes and hides. They go and they hide in the dark somewhere, and then Kevin would then let people out, and they would go try to find the single person who's hiding in the dark. But here's the thing, when you find the person, you get in the hiding spot with them, and you stay there. And then more people start to find the hiding person, and you get a bunch of sardines in this hiding place, right? Do you get the game? Makes sense, right? Our problem is that we treat church like a game of sardines, right? Like we'll just hide in our little bubble here, and we'll hope that people will come and find us, and we'll grow, but we're just going to hide in our bubble here. We just got our little bubble of people that we like, people that we're okay with. Maybe one or two of you we don't like, but the rest of you we like, right? But the reality is we weren't called to play sardines. If we're going to play any game, we were called Christian, nope, I'm getting the name wrong. Carmen Imes. Carmen Imes, she wrote a book about what it means to be made in the image of God. And she talks about the whole thing as a game of blob tag. See, this is a different kind of game where you have one person who's it, like tag, right? And you go out and you tag somebody else, and now you're both it. You don't get to stop being it. Nobody gets to stop being it. Now there's two people who are it, and they go out and they tag people. Now there's four people who are it, right? And the goal is to go until everybody is it. This is what the temple was supposed to be. This is what God called us to. Not to play sardines, to play blob tag, to go and to get as many people to be it as we can. And as we gather as a church, these Sundays, what we're doing here is these are moments to be praying for the nations, praying all over for the people who are it, and that they would find more people to tag, and that more people would be brought in, and that Jesus would be revealed to more people, and more homes, and more communities, and more families. And then we depart for the week, and we get to spend 6 whole days playing blob tag. What a life, guys. Right? Like this is what we do. But do you know why we like to play sardines instead of blob tag? Because of faith. And so a lot of times it's because we don't have it. See, look at the end of this. In Mark 11:19, it says, "When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. And in the morning as they were along, they saw the fig tree, and it was withered from the roots. And Peter remembered and said to Jesus, 'Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed is withered.' 'Have faith in God,' Jesus answered. 'Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go, throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. And therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins.'" See, the temple was understood as this place that was particularly effective for prayer. if you wanted your prayers to be heard, if you were like extra like, God, I need you to step in a big way, guess where you're going to pray? The temple. But the temple wasn't doing its job anymore. And Jesus knew that it was time for that entity to die. The fig tree was symbolic of this. See, fig trees are really unique because fig trees will actually start to grow their fruit and then the leaves, right? Most trees will grow the leaves and then you start to see the fruit budding and growing. Fig trees are the reverse. You get the fruit and then the leaves. So when Jesus, even though it wasn't the season for figs, it said it wasn't the season for figs and Jesus still got angry. But he saw the leaves. He saw the sign. You don't have leaves without fruit. The fruit comes first. When looking at the temple, Jesus saw that it was beautiful. It visually depicted everything that you could want the temple of the living God to depict. Except that it, like the fig tree, bore no fruit. Jesus' curse towards the fig tree wasn't just to kill the fig tree, it was to accelerate what was already true. If the tree wasn't bearing the fruit, it was already dying. It had no purpose. The temple was already dying. They had left their purpose behind. Jesus was just accelerating what was already true. Now we have two options with what we want to do with this passage. We can either look around and we can point the finger at all the churches that we think may be in the same state. Or we can heed Jesus' call to prayer and press in deeper. See, I grew up learning everything that was wrong with every church that wasn't ours, right? Like we would look around, we're like, man, there are a lot of people wrong out there. There's like 12 of us that got it right and everybody else is wrong. It's wild, right? And so we would learn what was wrong with all these other churches, all these other denominations. I took classes to learn everything wrong with every denomination that wasn't ours. And I spent all of my time learning how to point the finger. But over time, Jesus met me. And Jesus worked in my heart. And I was able to see the beauty of what he's already been a part of in so many different places. With people I don't agree with. I'm like, your theology is wrong. And you are reaching so many more people for Jesus than me. How do you do that? Right? Like, what a wild concept of how Jesus is able to work. And so I shifted from pointing the finger and having only a single sermon in my repertoire, which was just to teach everybody that the world's going to hell in a handbasket, to now praying for the world, praying for the nations, and being incredibly optimistic about the saving power of Jesus. But do you know what it takes to be incredibly optimistic about the saving work of Jesus? It takes a crazy amount of faith. Right? Like when you watch the news, can you smile because you're like, Jesus is in this. Just wait and see. Jesus is in this. Right? When you drive to the west side of 99, can you smile and be like, Jesus is doing something here. Jesus is working here. Right? That takes a lot of faith. See, Jesus, as he does, invites us into this crazy tension that makes almost no sense. He invites us into this place where we can and should be angry about the injustices that are happening around the world. Right? Jesus is flipping tables. We're supposed to be like Jesus. And he invites us into this place where we should be angry about the injustices of the world, and yet where we are simultaneously optimistic about the work that he is doing. That's the tension we're called into. To be angry about the things that are wrong, and to be optimistic that, man, Jesus is doing something here. Jesus is working here. Like, what if the next time that you encountered that political issue, I thought about bringing some up, but I won't. You're welcome. But the next time you encounter that political issue that always seems to cause your blood to boil, you prayed for God to redeem that to himself. And then you asked him for the faith to sit confidently in the knowledge that he will redeem all things to himself. That's what Colossians teaches us. May I remind you again that the big picture behind this whole thing is Jesus' desire for everyone to have access to God. Everyone. So who is it who's outside of that everyone in your imagination, but not God's? Right? We like to think, I've got everyone in my imagination. Until real life happens. Until we get in those circumstances. Until we get on the road. And then all of a sudden we're angry. We're angry for the wrong reasons. And we talk about those people. And, we want everyone except, and we wouldn't say it out loud. But Jesus has this really sneaky way of revealing what's actually in our hearts. See, if we're honest with ourselves, we read ourselves into this story as table flipping Jesus. We see Jesus flipping tables and we're like, oh yeah, let's go. I know some tables that need to be flipped, Jesus. But that's not who we are. That's not where we are in the story. See, some of us are the money changers. We're the ones preventing people from having access to God. Some of us are the guy in the story who wasn't even mentioned, who's walking in with his lamb, ready to go make a sacrifice, looking over the oppressed and saying, well, I got my lamb, so not my problem. Those are the people we are in the story. So who needs to be included in your everyone? How much more faith do you need to include them? What would it take in your life for you to partner with the global church to be participants in a house of prayer for all nations? So 3 takeaways for us. Number 1, pray for more faith. Pray for more faith, right? Like this is how my prayer life started, is I would pray and I'd be like, God, prayer doesn't make sense. Please help. That's how it started, right? There is nothing wrong with going to God and saying, God, I need more faith. You know what Thomas did? We call him Doubting Thomas. That's what he's known for. Think about that. Like, through all generations forever, you're now known as Doubting Thomas. And yet, this was the guy who said, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Sometimes that needs to be our prayer. God, I have faith, but help me where I lack faith. Number 2, invite someone new to your table. Why do we care about the Marys and that Jesus' mom was oppressed? Proximity. Close that proximity between you and others. Invite new people to your table. Share stories. Listen. Hear what others are going through. And number 3, read Psalm 47. I don't normally give a lot of reading assignments, but I really wanted to this week. Read Psalm 47. The nations belong to Yahweh. We get so caught up in this little group. And so read and ask God to shift your mindset to who he's after, who he loves, who he's for. So number 1, pray for more faith. Number 2, invite someone new to your table. And number 3, read Psalm 47. Now maybe your reality this morning is actually that you have been outside of that everyone. Maybe you're the person outside of that everyone. Maybe your reality is that you've believed the lie that you are too far gone and that God wouldn't want you anymore. That there's no way he could love you anymore. I want you to know today that God is calling you into his family. God is inviting you into his family to be a part of what he's a part of. I want you to know that Jesus fights for you. That when you feel like you're outside the everyone, this table flipping is for you. He's coming after you. And he won't let anyone or anything get in his way of you knowing just how deeply loved you are. Today is your opportunity to step out into faith. I want you to know that if the Bible says if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And so we're going to shift into this moment of worship. And I want you to know we're going to have a prayer team in the back. I will be back there as well. And if you need prayer, if you have questions, if there's just things that you're wrestling through and you don't know what to do, we're back there for you. We would love to pray with you. And we would love to see a moment where you can step into God's everyone. Would you pray with me? God, we just thank you this morning that you are a God who fights for us, that even in our brokenness, in our sin, in all the things that we do wrong, in the brokenness of our own hearts and desires, that you come after us, that you want us. And Jesus, may we steward ourselves to you well. I pray over this church that we would be a church who recognizes this massive mission that you're a part of, and that we would excitedly jump on board. That we would step into the crazy things that you call us to. That you would give us faith where we lack it. And that we could be exactly the people who you have created us to be. Jesus, we thank you, we love you, and we lay ourselves at your feet. It's in your perfect name that we pray. Amen.